Hey everyone, I'm so excited to welcome you back on to another episode of SAFT Podcast and a very happy new year. Welcome to 2024, and I'm so delighted to have Piyush join me in this new edition, new season, new year of SAFT Podcast. Piyush, welcome back.
Hey, happy new year to all of you. It's really glad to be a great joy to be back, with all of you. And we're continuing on our series on natural theology. I'll give a quick brief of what we have been doing. As you all know, we have been looking at the series of natural theology, and we're looking at the moral argument in this season.
Yeah.
And in the previous episode, we saw about, how there are different grounds on which we can ground morality on. And there are different atheist friends of us who come and who try to ground morality on different grounds. And, for example, can we ground it on numbers or any other natural metrics? But we discussed how there are different disputes if we ground it on them. And it is very, difficult to do that. So we concluded on this regard, and I would suggest that if you haven't watched the previous episode, do go ahead and watch it. The link is in the description, so that you are well connected and you're not lost as we continue discussing in this season. So let's just go ahead and Jacob, can you give a short brief of what we have been looking at in this journey? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So as Piyush said, we've been doing the moral argument for a while. So we've started off with the very first premise of the moral argument. Piyush, you want to go ahead and state the moral argument in its form for our audience to revise?
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah. If God doesn't exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2 states that objective moral values and duties do exist. Hence, premise 3 states that God does exist.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to revise it, because I think the last time the podcast came out was in December.
Yeah.
So it's been over a month. I think by the time this episode comes out. So yeah, it's really good to revise it.
Right.
So as Pete said in the last episode, we were specifically looking at, where do you base objective morality apart from God? Right? If you were to set it on some ground, where do you place it? And we specifically looked last time at, as Pete said, with the idea of numbers, right? If can it exist like numbers, like where do numbers exist? You can't go into the nature out there and find the number 2 or root 4 or root 2 hidden anywhere. So they exist in some other form. But in the previous episodes, we were looking at, can we really say that God is the basis for objective morality? Or can we ground it on somewhere else?
Yeah.
So that was what we were exploring intensely in the previous episodes. And we've looked at, from the onset, we looked at different versions of the moral argument and so on and so forth. So we've been doing a study quite in depth. I won't say it's too in depth, but for someone who want to learn about the moral argument, we have done pretty much of a in-depth dive into the moral argument so far. And before we move into the rest of the podcast, I want to say that we have launched our first indigenous language wing, SAFT Malayalam. So we'll drop a link in the description to our YouTube channel. You can go and check out our first video, which just came out on January 15th. And in that, we explore in a very similar dialogue format with our good friend Denise Sebastian on what happened with New Atheism.
Yeah.
New Atheism sprung to the forefront of the world in the early 2000s. And then around 15 years back, it started to die down, as was even mentioned by some of the atheist thinkers and speakers themselves. So what happened there, and why is it that we see atheist speakers like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a leading voice of the New Atheist movement, embrace Christianity? And why did Christopher Hitchens embark on doing a Bible study on the book of John? So these are all fascinating conversations that we have, that we dive into the conversation. So check out SAFT Malayalam on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Yeah. And with that, we'll dive back into the moral argument. So Piyush stated the premise 1, premise 2, and the conclusion of the moral argument. Now we're going to focus on premise 2, that objective moral values and duties do exist. Now, Piyush, do you think that objective morality in general, right, or objective moral values and duties actually really exist?
Yeah, definitely. They do exist. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we all do. I mean, yes, as a viewer, you yourself would also definitely agree with us. Now, to recap, what do we mean by objective morality or objective moral values and duties? Well, moral values talk about good or bad, whether a choice, an option you make is inherently good or bad. And duties talk about a sense of obligation. Should I do it? Should I not do it? That is a sense of duties, right and wrong. In English, we use them interchangeably, right? We use good and bad, right and wrong. We use them interchangeably.
Yeah.
But in this context, they have different set of meanings. Good and bad refer to values, right and wrong refer to duties. So that being said, when we say objective, it means something that exists independently of me, the subject. It exists independently of my taste, preference, and so on and so forth. So I prefer vanilla ice cream over chocolate ice cream. But that's a very subjective thing. Now, Piyush, you may have a very different taste than me.
Yeah.
But that's a very subjective thing. But whatever be the case, a scoop of vanilla ice cream, 100 grams of vanilla ice cream or 200 grams of vanilla ice cream has X amount of calories. No matter how much I like vanilla or no matter how much I hate vanilla ice cream. So the caloric content of that cup of vanilla ice cream is objective. It is not based on me, the subject, but it is purely based on the object, that scoop of vanilla ice cream. But when it comes to the taste aspect, it's based on subjective. So this is a distinction between objective and subjective. Now, what we are going to ask is, does objective morality really exist? Now, I know what you'll be thinking, right, Piyush? I mean, this is something that we all definitely seem to agree, right? We genuinely think that rape is really wrong for everyone all across the world. Which is why we would be angered if you see about a news about rape happening in Mexico or in New Zealand or in Tasmania or in Serbia or Siberia or wherever. Right? We genuinely think that rape is really wrong. And we would also believe, and we also do believe that rape is really wrong, even if we learn about an instance that happened 200 years back or 1,000 years back or 2,000 years back. Because we believe objective morality to hold independent of human culture, human time, human geographical differences, and so on and so forth. And so you'd be wondering, why are we talking about the objective nature of morality? Because, as it turns out, a lot of people do actually think that morality isn't really objective. And for some, it's mainly because they realize that an objective moral framework or considering that objective morality exists leads them to consider that there is an objective moral lawgiver, a lawgiver independent of humans. And because of that, they would say, okay, I'm going to do away with the belief that objective morality does exist. For others, it could be something different. Maybe they don't want to succumb and restrain their moral behaviors or moral actions. So they would say, well, it's really subjective. I don't think it's really objective. So I should be let to do whatever I want to do. And that's a very destructive mindset and attitude to take up. So there are different reasons. But there are objections to whether morality is really objective or not. Now, within this context of this conversation, the people that I engage with, the atheists that I've had the opportunity to interact with, I've seen those who object to whether morality is really objective do so in the context of not wanting to consider that God exists. It is not because they want to do deviant stuff and do whatever they want and say, hey, it's subjective, you let me do it. No, that doesn't seem to be the case. Their case is they don't want to eventually concede that there is an objective moral lawgiver. So they would rather say that objective morality doesn't exist. No, that may not be the case with every atheist that we interact with, but there are those who object. Now, what is the nature of, or how do we show that, or how do we come to continue our belief that morality is really objective? Well, it's quite similar to our sensory experience. So we have a moral experience where we experience something as a lie and as false and as cheating and as selfishness, right? When we see someone do something, we immediately identify it as, let's say, for example, selfless or selfish. And we immediately experience emotions also within us very much connected to what we see. So we have a realm of moral experience, and in that experience, we interact with moral values and duties, right? Selfishness is bad and it's wrong, and selflessness is good and it's right. So in our moral experience, we interact with this. just as we interact with the physical world out there using our sensory experience. Now, what's interesting about this is that now I am seated on a table, not on a table, I'm seated in front of a table. I'm seated on a chair, but I'm seated in front of a table.
Yeah.
And I can see that it's a glass table, and I know what glass is supposed to feel like. It's not supposed to feel like sponge. So I run my finger, and I also sense through my touch, my sense of touch, that it is glass.
Right.
So I have a visual perception, and I also have a touch perception. So through my sense perception, I understand this is a glass table. Now, there is no way for me to get out of my system, to get outside my sensory experience and test and see, well, what I'm experiencing is really the case or not. So for instance, let's say I am a security in a building and I am seeing through the CCTV footage what's happening in front of the building. Now I'm doubting, is the CCTV footage true? Is it capturing what's actually out there? Well, what do? Well, I can get out of my CCTV room, go in front of the building and see if what I'm seeing on the camera is what's actually happening. And I can say, okay, this camera is true, it's actually capturing valid data or not.
Yeah.
But I can't do the same thing with my sense perception. I can't get out there and then look at the table and then say, okay, yeah, my eyesight, my sense perceptions, my visual perception is all accurate. I can't do that. It's the same thing with our moral perception. We can't really get out there and test and see if our moral perception is actually right or not. So what's interesting is that we don't have any reason to deny our objective understanding of moral values and duties, or our objective understanding of morality, just as we don't see any reason to doubt if the physical reality is objectively there or not. Right? When I say there's this table in front of me, Piyush, as if you are here in this conversation with me, I would assume that you also understand this table to be there. I assume my sense perception to be objectively true, that you also would see it. And there is no reason for me to deny it. Similarly, we don't have any reason, we don't find ourselves any reason to say that our perception of morality is subjective, that it is not objective. Right? There are people who are colorblind, who have a very different perception of colors around them, but we don't say that therefore the whole world is colorblind. We identify that as an anomaly, as something that is out of the normal. And so the same thing gets applied to people who think rape is right. We don't say that therefore morality is subjective because one person thinks rape is right. We understand that as an anomaly compared to what is objectively out there. So I think that's a good place to start off with.
Yeah. Like what if someone comes and says that, the sense of what is right is wrong is a part of the social biological evolution, hence it is not subjective but morality is objective. How do we tackle those situations and what do we answer?
Yeah, so it actually cuts into two separate objections. The first one is to say that, because we are here as a product of socio-biological evolution, objective morality doesn't really exist.
Okay.
And that's the first way. Second way the objection will come around is that because we are driven by, and more precisely because we are driven by biological evolution, we can't really confidently believe that objective morality exists. So it's, it seems technical, but it is technical. So it's two different ways of the way it can come out an objection. So the first way to say is that because we are driven by socio-biological evolution, morality cannot be really objective. That the statement, objective morality exists, is false. Right? I'll give you what this means, right? The idea is that our way of interacting with the world, our way of interacting with values, with symbols, all of that is driven by the ever-changing channels of socio-biological evolution, right? And that's the idea, that all our entire capability to know the world, our entire capability to reason with the world, our entire capability to interact with the world is driven by evolving channels of social structures and biological structures. So they say that therefore you can't say that objective morality is true. A similar situation is when, let's say you and I, we read in the Tinkle Digest, a famous comic strip series in India. We read in the Tinkle Digest that the earth is a sphere and that it revolves around the sun. Now, because the general nature of a Tingle Digest is very fictitious and not really, driven by general reality,
Yeah.
someone comes up to me and you and say that, hey, you read that the Earth is a sphere in the Tingle Digest, so therefore the Earth is not a sphere. Because why? Because you read it in a Tingle Digest, so you can't really believe that the Earth is a sphere. Now, that can really be the case, right? However, or through whatever means we come to hold a belief is irrelevant to whether that belief is true or not. You and I may hear about the heliocentric solar system through maybe a storytelling instance, or we may read about it in a science fiction movie. We may read about a science fiction novel, or our friend who is, generally a liar tells us that. But that doesn't mean that therefore that statement is definitely false, right? Because we know that.
Yeah.
Let's assume that you are hearing about the heliocentric solar system, that the sun is in the middle of the solar system. Imagine that you are hearing about that model for the very first time through a storybook. Does that mean that therefore we are not in a heliocentric solar system? Definitely not. So the channels by which we know something doesn't determine whether that which is true or not. Now, obviously, we factor that in when we want to check the reliability, right? I would rather read it in a science journal than in a storybook, because that is a way that we use, a mental shortcut that we use to figure out whether what is true or not. But therefore, that doesn't make it false if you read about something, about the planet system or something in a storybook. Similarly, objective morality can really exist even if the mechanisms we use to understand morality comes from changing social and biological structures. So that's the first thing. And our biological structures, the way we understand the world, the way we understand this physical world, the table all around us is slowly changing. Right? As a kid, we understood reality around us quite differently, but that's not how we do it.
Yeah.
And organisms that are inferior to us don't engage with the world like we do. If you take a purely Darwinian evolutionary understanding, then we are here by the product of accidental changes from lower species to higher species. So a firefly or a housefly sees the world differently than we would see. So what we see is that if we apply that same principle, then it is not just our moral apprehension that is changing and evolving and undergoing changes and pressures from social and biological constraints, but also our sense perception, right? My eyes, my ears, my nose have evolved over millions of years under a purely Darwinian worldview. So therefore, do I say that because my sense perception is a result of evolution that I can't take objective reality to be true? No, we can't do that. So that is the way the first objection follows off. And I hope you're able to track along as we go into the second objection, and I'll keep it quite brief. The second objection says that, now this again, it's a variant of the key objection. Social or cultural and biological evolution, therefore objective morality doesn't exist. That's where we're starting off. The second objection says that because we are driven by our normal process of evolution, we can't really believe what we believe, or we can't really know whether what we believe is really true or not. We can't be confident if it is actually true or not. Now, here's what it means. Imagine that, okay, Piyush, what happens to you if you go and pick up a king cobra?
I mean, yeah. I'll
No,
just pick
what
it up.
happens then?
Or
Is it going to play with you? Are you going to have a good time having it as a pet? Or
no, it's gonna attack me and escape from me. Yeah.
Yeah, right? So simplifying it, if you go and pick up a king cobra, it will bite you. Now I'm going to give you a list of options of what could happen, right? If you pick up a king cobra, it will bite you. Or okay, if you pick up a king cobra, first option, it bites you and you die from its deadly venom. First option. Second thing is, if you pick up a king cobra, the people in the village will come and beat you to death. The third option, if you pick up a king cobra, aliens will come and abduct you. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, here's what I'm going to talk about. So we can slowly get into it. I know this podcast will get a bit longer, but I want to complete this whole chunk here. Okay. In each of these three cases, your chance of survival is really low. Right? The end result is not supportive of your survival.
Right.
That's clear. Right?
Yeah.
So under a purely naturalistic Darwinian evolutionary framework, our evolutionary process, right, is survival oriented. Survival of the fittest, we want to survive, and that's it. So if that is the case, our cognitive faculty, our sense, our experience of the world, our way of reasoning, our way of understanding, all that we use to make sense of reality, all of that is driven towards survival and not truth. So it doesn't matter whether you picking up a cobra and aliens abducting you is false. As long as that belief prevents you from picking up a cobra and enhances your chance of survival, that's fine. That's all that is needed. This is what happens if you have purely evolution driving our whole way of coming about as a species. Because evolution is concerned about survival. It's concerned about behavior that leads to survival, not about truth. So if your belief leads you to survive, even if it's a false belief, that's fine. You're surviving. So you and I will not go and pick up a cobra. Why? Because we believe that aliens will come and abduct us. Now that is false, right? It is blatantly false. But because it is driving you and me to be more survival oriented, that we will have better chance of surviving, that we won't put us in such a dumb, dangerous situation, we will continue to hold on to that belief. It doesn't matter whether it's true or false as long as you and I survive. So this is the second way this argument can come along. So in the moral perspective, it is that when you say rape is wrong, well, you don't really know why rape is wrong or why you really believe rape is wrong, right? You believe you are evolutionary, you are conditioned by evolution to believe rape is wrong because it is driven towards your survival. Believing rape is wrong is going to help you to survive. Are you believing rape is wrong because it is actually wrong? Or are you believing rape is wrong because it helps you to survive? Well, it's a survival that's going to win out. So evolution isn't concerned about whether a belief is true or not, as long as it helps you to survive. Now, what's interesting is that this can only work in a purely naturalistic framework, where only the natural world exists. There is no God, nothing. Okay, so purely Darwinian, accidental, macroevolutionary perspective. Now, Alvin Plantinga, one of the best Christian philosopher minds in the last century, he combined both of this, and the examples that I've used are sort of variations of his. He combined both of this and presented the evolutionary argument against naturalism. What basically means is that, let's assume that you are an atheist, and so you would hold on to naturalism. You would say that the natural world is all that exists, there is nothing supernatural. So you are a naturalist. And because you are a naturalist, when you want to explain how humans came about to be, you won't say God created them in his image or anything. You would say that we came about as a result of Darwinian evolution. Okay? So you hold on to naturalism and evolution. So there is no external force that can interact with the human world. This natural world is all that there is. And evolution is, the evolutionary Darwinian mechanism is creating species and it's creating us. And it is driven through a survival. So it is giving us our cognitive faculties, our capacity to make sense of the world. It is giving us those faculties and those capacities that is focused towards survival and not truth. So you can't even really actually believe that naturalism is true. Why? Because the belief that you hold is not something that you hold because it is true, but because it is conducive for your survival.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a big paradox, right? You believe naturalism is true, you believe evolution is true, but evolution is driven not by truth-seeking mentality, but survivalistic mentality. So even if evolution is false and naturalism is false, you may continue to hold on to it as long as it helps you to survive.
Yeah.
Now this is a simplified, dialed-down version of the whole argument. Right? For much serious engagement with it, I would refer you to Alvin Plantinga's works and elsewhere. So this is a very interesting place where it comes to effect. So in summation, if someone says, well, we can't say that objective morality exists because of socio-cultural or socio-biological evolution, the first point is, even if it is cultural and biological evolution that gave us the understanding that rape is wrong and all of that, the way we learn something doesn't tell us whether something's wrong or not.
Right.
The way you learn that the earth is heliocentric doesn't tell us that therefore the earth is heliocentric or not. You can learn from a comic book and the solar system will still be heliocentric.
Yeah.
So as long as God exists, objective moral values and duties do exist. Whether it's coming from different channels or through, whether God is directly intervening and giving you that, or whether you're learning it through culture and biological evolution, it's irrelevant. And if someone goes as far as to say, I would be really surprised if in my conversation with a normal atheist, someone who is not a philosopher, that's what I mean, or someone who's not diving deep into these philosophical dialogues. If someone comes up and says to me, "Oh, because we are here as a product of evolution, you can't be confident in your belief that evolution is true," then the whole weight, how it contradicts with every belief that we hold, will come into picture, which is the evolutionary argument against naturalism. So the key point is that we all understand that morality is objective in such inherent fashion.
Yeah.
Just as we understand this sense perception of the objective world is also really true. And that's the way we engage with reality. And that's the default position as it turns out.
Okay. So, I think it's pretty clear and obvious that morality is objective, and it is clearly understood that different acts of violence and all of these things are objectively wrong. And I'll just quickly, quote something by an atheist philosopher, Michael Ruse. He says, "The man who says that it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that just shows we all agree, right? That's how certain we are. We are certain about objective morality like we're certain about mathematical truths. And David Brink, and I want to put out this quote by David Brink, he's an ethicist. His point is that our belief that objective moral values and duties do exist is the default position. It is what we start with. And he says that there might be no objective moral standards, but this would be a revisionary conclusion to be accepted only as the result of extended and compelling argument that the commitments of ethical objectivity are unsustainable." So the idea is simple. Objective morality is our default position. The only way we would say it is subjective is if we have extended and compelling argument that we would have to revise our entire understanding.
Yeah.
But that is the case. And what we do end up seeing is that we see our atheist friends deny the undeniable. They would deny that objective morality exists so that they can deny God.
Right.
So I hope that if you're hearing this conversation and you may find it technical, you can definitely give it a listen again, or hit us up if you have questions, drop a comment below. We will do our very best to get back to you. That you would reevaluate why you are denying the undeniable in this case. If this resonates with you, why do you really do not want to give hold for God? Is it because you have an understanding of God that you can't resonate with? Well, if so, hit us up. We would be most delighted to have a very simple, casual conversation with you. Maybe I'm more certain that you may not have been really introduced to the God of the Bible. You may have seen certain caricatures of the God of the Bible put up in different contexts. And so we would love to converse with you and present to you the one true God that we worship, that we've come to realize is the ultimate lawgiver, and help clear the mist of confusion and caricatures, and then present to you so that you may actually come out and make an unbiased choice as best as you can.
Yeah.
But and that's our pitch to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for tuning in this evening with us, and we're really glad that you could join in. But we've gone way ahead of our bite-sized limit of 20 minutes. But this is something very important, and we want to cover all points. So that's why we went ahead. Thank you for tuning in. We pray that you stay safe and have a great week ahead, and we'll see you in the next one.